Stars, Secrets, and Marshmallows, written and narrated by Christina. Cat Noir glanced down at the doorknob and was trying to think of a way to reach it without moving Marinette. But before he could decide what to do, the door swung open and they found Sabine standing in front of them. "It's been so long, I was beginning to worry that..." She stopped short as she noticed her daughter being carried by the city superhero, and Cat Noir hurried to explain. "She tripped and fell in a pothole on our way back. We think she might have sprained her ankle." "Oh dear, I was afraid something like this would happen." She ushered them inside and shut the door. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Tupan-Chang. It's kind of my fault. She was racing me to see who would get back here faster." Marinette began to protest that it was entirely her fault, but Sabine waved a hand to silence them both. "Oh, never mind that. I'm not blaming either of you. If anything, it's the fault of the city for not making better use of our tax money." Cat Noir let out a small smile in relief, then followed Sabine up to their living room and carefully placed Marinette on the couch as Sabine went to explain to Tom what had happened. Marinette smiled appreciatively towards him, but flinched and gave a slight cry as she accidentally twisted her foot against the couch cushions. Tom and Sabine rushed into the room while Cat Noir stepped back and watched as they began fussing over her. Sabine placed some ice on the ankle, setting it gently on top of some pillows, while Tom offered to get her something to drink and seemed unconvinced that she hadn't been hurt anywhere else as well. Cat Noir gazed fondly at them and found himself wishing that he could have been a part of this family. They cared so deeply about each other and expressed it freely through words as well as actions. He began to shift uncomfortably as they seemed to have forgotten he was there, but he didn't want to take their attention away from Marinette. He was about to try to quietly slip away when Sabine stepped over to him and smiled warmly. "Thank you for bringing her home to us, Cat Noir. It was the least I could do." He bowed slightly, but nearly choked as he felt a hearty weight slap across his back. "Well done, son. You managed to almost bring her back in one piece." Tom leaned closer and raised a hand conspiratorially. "And with her 2 left feet, it's a wonder you were able to bring her back with one of them." "I heard that, Dad," Marinette called from the couch a few steps away. Tom laughed guiltily. "I'm kidding, sweetheart. You were never one to let a little clumsiness stop you, and besides, you know I love you even if you have crazy coordination." "Good thing, too, 'cause you know who she gets it from," Sabine said with a knowing smile, giving her husband a slight whack on the arm before gesturing to the hallway. "Would you like to take a few treats before you go, Cat Noir?" "Wait!" They turned back to look at Marinette, who had propped herself into a sitting position on the couch. "Couldn't Cat Noir stay for our usual power outage traditions?" Tom and Sabine looked at each other doubtfully. Then Tom said, "I don't know if we should do them this time. Not with your ankle the way it is." "But it already feels somewhat better, and Cat Noir could help with the things I normally do." Marinette sent them a pleading look. "Please." Sabine hesitated. "I don't know, I guess we could." She turned to face him. "Are you free to stay for a little longer, Cat Noir?" He glanced between her and Marinette. He was pretty sure his father wouldn't be checking in on him anytime soon, and he had to admit he was curious to see what the Tupan-Chang's traditions might be. "I'd be happy to stay a while longer, though I wouldn't want to impose on your family's way of doing things." "Nonsense. You're always welcome here. Come with me, I'll show you how to set things up." Cat Noir followed Sabine down the small flights of stairs back to the storefront, and it suddenly dawned on him how different the house looked from what he had originally anticipated. He had been too busy with Marinette to notice earlier, but now he took in their quiet surroundings and was amazed by how cozy it all was. He had never experienced a power outage before, but assumed the house would be dark and cold, and he had pictured the family huddled gloomily together on the floor. Instead, he found the house alight with a cheerful, soft glow from the many candles that decorated the crooks and crannies that filled the house, casting small, delicate shadows on the wall, almost as if they were dancing to an ever-echoing song. They gave off a pleasant smell that mixed wonderfully with the scent of freshly baked goods, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Sabine had him stuff rolled pieces of cloth against the windows to keep the cold night air from slipping in, then led him into a room he had never seen before that featured a large mantelpiece surrounding an old wood stove. Pressed against the wall was a light blue sofa, and to the right stood a small but elegant evening chair. Tom came in just then with Marinette in his arms, and Cat Noir smiled to himself as the family before him appeared to be anything but gloomy. He stepped aside, watching as it became a flurry of joyful activity. Tom tended to the fire, Sabine fetched things from the kitchen, while Marinette pointed out helpful details and added to the excitement from her place on the couch. Cat Noir, Cat Noir! He turned and found Marinette tugging eagerly on his arm, snapping him out of his thoughts. Yes? Can you go into that closet there and bring the 3 stools you find to the fireplace? He looked to where she was pointing and nodded, then quickly set them up the way she said. Did I do something wrong, Princess? He asked, noting the concentrated frown on her face. Huh? Oh no, I was just trying to think of another thing to sit on, since we've never had a guest join us before. He glanced back at the stools and realized he was trying to find a place for him. No worries, I can just stand or sit on the floor. No way! You wouldn't be able to reach as well, and besides, you're the company. You can't make us look bad by having you, the hero of Paris, sitting on the hard floor. He laughed, then glanced curiously back at the fireplace. Why? What do we need to be near the fireplace for? You know my suit keeps me warm, remember? Marinette smiled and leaned closer, her eyes twinkling as if she knew a wonderful secret. Because this is the one time of year my mom lets us have an excuse to toast marshmallows. Cat Noir felt his face light up with excitement just as Tom and Sabine re-entered the room. Who's ready to toast some marshmallows? Tom called, carrying several long forked utensils and a large bag of white puffy sweets. Me? Cat Noir exclaimed, waving his hand enthusiastically before realizing what he was doing and quickly putting it down with an embarrassed chuckle. I mean, that sounds like fun. Marinette grinned at him. Seems like someone's excited. Cat Noir smirked back at her. Are you saying I'm being melodramatic, Princess? She shook her head with a laugh as he helped her over to one of the small stools by the fire. Sabine had brought an extra crate in and fixed it up next to the others for Cat Noir to sit on. He gratefully took the fork, stick, and marshmallow that Tom offered him, eyeing Marinette as she stabbed hers onto the tip before doing the same to his. He had never roasted marshmallows before. In fact, the only time he ever had some was from a little bowl at one of his father's business parties, when he was much younger. He wasn't supposed to eat many sweets, but his bodyguard had slipped him a few while Natalie wasn't looking. Now he stared at the little white puff ball in wonder, holding it close to his face and poking at it slightly. Marinette raised an eyebrow as she glanced over at him. What are you doing? It's so squishy. That's what I'm gonna name mine. Mr. Squishy. Marinette stared at him blankly for a moment, then realized he was serious and let out a short laugh. Well, don't get too attached. You know you have to eat him, right? Cat Noir scoffed playfully. Are you kidding? That's the adventure he's waited for his whole life. Marinette shook her head with a knowing smile and turned her attention to putting her marshmallow over the large open fire. Tom and Sabine had already started on theirs and were now competing to see who would toast the perfect marshmallow first. Cat Noir gave Mr. Squishy one last squeeze before sticking him deep into the hot flames. He had never done this before, but he'd seen people do it in movies, and it looked simple enough. He moved his stick deeper into the fire, trying to get to the biggest flames possible in order to toast his marshmallow faster and finally have a chance to taste it. All of a sudden, the top of his marshmallow started to swell, the tip shriveling up into a lumpy black mass as a burst of flames engulfed the entire disheveling wad of sugar. Cat Noir cried out in alarm, pulling it out of the fire and holding it at an arm's distance, uncertain what to do next as he eyed the blazing fireball in dismay. He turned to Marinette, who didn't seem to share his concerns and instead was snickering at his situation as he gave her a panicked look. Well, put it out already, Cat, she exclaimed with exasperation, but couldn't hide a smile. She grabbed hold of his stick and shook it a little, then motioned for him to blow on it. As the flames faded away, Cat Noir looked sadly at the now scorched blob in front of him and sighed in regret. Poor Mr. Squishy, Marinette said with a mock expression of sorrow. She turned to him with a sly smile. It's what you get, though, for being so careless, sticking in the hottest part of the fire like that. Cat Noir chuckled sheepishly. Sorry, I guess I was a little excited. I've never roasted marshmallows before. Marinette's eyes widened. Really? He grinned with a shrug. For the marshmallow's sake, that's probably a good thing. Would you like a new one, Cat Noir? Sabine asked from a few seats down. He looked back at his marshmallow and felt bad about letting it go to waste. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Dupanchang, but I think I'll eat this one. He gave Marinette a secret grin as he said quietly, Can't deny Mr. Squishy his greatest adventure. She gave him a knowing look as he popped it in his mouth, watching as he winced from the strange texture. The outside was crisp and bitter, making it difficult for him to keep a straight face. But the inside was still sweet, and he felt a little better as the gooey sugar filled his mouth and eased the charred taste from his tongue. "How was it?" he smirked back at her. "Delicious." Marinette didn't look convinced, but the wry twinkle in her eye quickly shifted to a full-on smile. "Here, it's time you discovered what a real marshmallow should taste like." His eyes widened as she slid her marshmallow off its stick and into his gloved hand. It was perfectly golden brown, firm to the touch, yet still soft as he placed it gratefully in his mouth. It melted effortlessly across his tongue, and his face lit up as the sweet, warm flavor lit up his entire being and felt like a taste of light itself. "Wow, you're right, that was amazing." She smiled back at him, then Tom passed him the bag of marshmallows and gestured for him to take some more. He took two and offered one to Marinette, who took it with a flourish as she shoved it onto the top of her stick. "Now I'll show you the key to making a perfect marshmallow. Watch and learn." Cat Noir chuckled slightly as he wasn't used to having his favorite cat puns thrown back at him, then watched carefully as she showed him how far to put it into the flames. Close enough to feel the heat, but not enough to get burned, and then demonstrated how to turn it slowly to allow it time to cook properly. Cat Noir glanced over at Marinette's parents and was only half surprised to see Mrs. Dupin Chang handing her finished marshmallows over to her husband. "You're not going to eat any?" he asked in playful astonishment. Sabine laughed. "Oh no, I just like toasting them. They're much too sugary for me." "Well, that's a shame, though I'd be more than happy to help you finish some if Mr. Dupin gets tired of them." Tom looked up indignantly. "Me? Tired of marshmallows? This is a baker you're talking to, son. I don't get tired of food. In fact, I bet I could eat more marshmallows than you." Cat Noir wiggled his eyebrows cheekily. "Oh, you're on." They both made a grab for the bag when Marinette leaned over and snatched it out of their reach. "Hold up, you two. Save some for the rest of us." The guys glanced at each other and laughed guiltily. "Okay, maybe I got a little carried away," Tom admitted, rubbing the back of his head with a grin. "I'll just take one, please, sweetie. Thank you." "You're very welcome, good sir," Marinette said airily, placing one delicately in his outstretched hand. "I would like one too, please," Cat Noir said, opening his hand with a meek smile. "Well, since you asked so nicely." Marinette gave him one, and they all turned their attention back to the fire. The room was quiet for a moment as they listened to the soft crackling of the fire and the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. Sabine sighed contentedly, then set her stick aside and gave her last marshmallow to Tom, who ate it readily. Cat Noir turned to them with a smile. "Thank you all so much for having me. I've had a really wonderful time, and it's so kind of you to let me join your special family traditions." "Oh, we're not done yet, Kitty," Marinette said with an excited tint to her voice. "There's more?" he asked incredulously, causing the rest of the family to laugh in amusement. "Yes, Dad tells the best campfire stories, and then we bring all our pillows and blankets to the living room and spend the night there instead of up in cold separate rooms. Not that you'll be staying for that part, of course, but the stories are fun," Marinette added quickly, a light blush coloring her cheeks. Cat Noir laughed softly and gave her a reassuring wink. "Stories would be great, and anything with your family is always fun. And by the way, we're very glad you could stay with us. You're welcome here any time, Cat Noir," Sabine said warmly. "Thanks again, Mrs. Dupin Chang." Marinette pulled out the marshmallow bag and counted to see how many were left. "Just 6 lonely marshmallows looking for a home. Any takers?" Tom slapped a hand against his forehead. "I forgot. We could have been adding chocolate and graham crackers this whole time. I'll go get them." He rushed to the kitchen, calling, "Save some for me," as he went. Sabine shook her head with a smile, then turned to the 2 teenagers beside her and said thoughtfully, "You know, marshmallows are one of my favorite symbols of strength and courage." "Really?" Cat Noir asked curiously, squishing one between his fingers and watching the flabby sugar try to retain its original shape. Sabine nodded with a knowing smile, then picked one up herself. "We're all kind of like marshmallows when we come into the world. Soft, squishy, sweet, but not living up to our full potential. The fire is like the harder things in life, and sometimes they can be really uncomfortable or scary, But when we're brave enough to face the heat, it can actually help us to learn and grow into better, stronger people. Cat Noir concentrated on her words, trying to make sure he would remember them, and noticed Marinette was listening carefully too. Sabine added, "It's good to expose yourself to new things and test your limits, working hard even when you don't feel like it. But we have to give ourselves time to rest and recover too. Just like how you have to turn the marshmallows in order for them to come out evenly. And you don't want to hold yourself in the fire too long or you'll burn yourself out. Isn't that right, Cat Noir?" They all laughed as the image of Cat Noir's mangled marshmallow came into mind. Then Sabine continued, "A burned marshmallow can still be sweet on the inside, but Marinette is a perfect example of what we can all strive to be. Strong and firm on the outside, even in the midst of problems, having the courage to see things through, while keeping your heart soft, not bitter and charred by your experiences, but staying sweet in spite of them." Cat Noir gazed in wonder at her, and exchanged a smile with Marinette, who also seemed to appreciate her mother's wisdom. Tom burst back into the room, his arms filled with more supplies. "I'm back. Anyone care for a slab of chocolate and 2 crackers to go with their marshmallows?" "Ooh, me please, Dad," Marinette exclaimed, waving her hand excitedly. "Look who's being melodramatic now," Cat Noir said, leaning closer to her and giving her a teasing look. She pushed him away playfully. "That's just because you've never had it before. Otherwise you would be purring with excitement. I may resemble a cat princess, but I don't purr, no matter how happy I am." "Oh, I'm pretty sure you do," she said, struggling to suppress a giggle, as if remembering an inside joke, though he wasn't entirely sure why it was so funny to her. They went back to toasting their marshmallows and laying them into sandwiches. Then Tom carried Marinette over to the sofa and began one of his famous stories. Mrs. Dupin Chang handed them each a soft blanket, then went to the evening chair and took out a small canvas, painting as she listened to what was likely a very familiar story, while Marinette motioned for her dad to scoot over and make room for Cat Noir on the couch. Cat Noir sat down gingerly, as it was rather a tight fit, but soon they were all settled and Tom began vivid descriptions of several old folk tales. Cat Noir tried to listen, but found his thoughts wandering as he gazed around the cozy scene. The fire flickered quietly on the opposite side of the small room, filling the room with a steady heat and quiet crackling that tried to lull him into a trance. Sabine painted quietly from her little armchair, while Tom continued talking with exaggerated and enthusiastic voices. It was so nice to be here, to feel like he was part of a real family. He felt his heart sink, and the light in his eyes dimmed slightly as he thought back to his life at home. A light thump landed on his shoulder, and he turned in surprise to see Marinette had fallen asleep, the blankets tucked tightly around her shoulders and a peaceful expression on her face as her head leaned heavily against him. He smiled softly down at her and tried to keep still as he turned his attention back to Tom's storytelling. Some of the stories were familiar to Cat Noir, as he had read them during his many hours of free time, but most were completely new to him, and he had a feeling that Mr. Dupin added his own creative twists to the original versions. And then he said, "You read my mind." Ha ha. Tom slapped his knee as he laughed at his own joke, his arm bumping sharply into Cat Noir, which caused Marinette to wake with a start. She rubbed her eyes sleepily, then realized she was leaning against him and gave a light laugh as she moved over to give him more space. "Sorry." "No worries." He wanted to tell her how much it comforted him just to be near her, and how the little things she did made him laugh. But that would probably seem weird, and he felt rather self-conscious sitting next to her broad-shouldered father, as he still remembered the last time he'd officially been invited to their house, which didn't go so well. Sabine glanced at Marinette, then gave Tom a knowing look. "That was a wonderful story, Tom, but I think we'll have to leave it there for tonight. It's about time we settle in for the night." Tom gave a loud yawn. "I think you're right, as usual, honey. I'm about to fall asleep myself." "I can help you gather your things before I go if you want," Cat Noir offered, trying to be helpful and not wanting to leave just yet. "That would be much appreciated, thank you, dear," Sabine said, showing him to the bedroom and directing him on which things to bring while she carried a small candle to light the way. Once they were all set up, Sabine said goodnight to Cat Noir and went to do her nightly routine in the bathroom, while Tom had already fallen asleep on the couch and was snoring heavily. Cat Noir turned to say goodbye to Marinette, but was surprised to see her standing beside him instead of curled up on the chair where he'd left her. Are you sure it's a good idea to stand on your foot so soon? He asked with concern. It feels much better already, and only hurts a little when I put pressure on it. Besides, there's something really important I want to show you. His eyes brightened with curiosity. Oh? I have one more tradition that I like to do when the power goes out. Normally I do it by myself, but I thought you might like it too. What is it? She gave a slight laugh as she took hold of his hand and began leading him eagerly up the stairs to her room. Come on, you have to see it for yourself. Her bedroom was almost completely dark except for a soft white tinge around the covered window, but Marinette maneuvered away confidently toward the side that had her loft bed. Cat Noir's cat vision flicked on as he followed closely behind. He was about to comment on how much one could take power for granted when a gleam of light caught his eye and he reached out to pull Marinette back just as she stumbled over the plastic container. She gasped as she almost toppled over, but Cat Noir had already slipped his arms under hers and steadied her back to her feet. Phew, thanks for the save, Cat Noir, she said with a smile, still a little shaken from surprise. What are heroes for? He winked at her before realizing she couldn't see it, but she gave him a look that made him think she had understood it anyway. He helped her up the ladder and followed her out of the skylight and onto the balcony overlooking the city. The wind had died down, and the cool night air was refreshing after the intense heat from the fireside. Cat Noir went back into the house for a moment and came back with a thick blanket which he carefully placed over Marinette's shoulders as she took a seat on the wide lawn chair and motioned for him to sit beside her. Thanks, kitty, she said with a smile, breathing in the coolness and tucking the blanket closer around her. So, what is it you wanted to show me, princess? This. She pointed up, and Cat Noir realized his night vision had faded away, and there was a silvery glow reflecting off Marinette's face. He tilted his head back and gasped in wonder as he found himself looking into an endless sea of dazzling stars, filling the sky with a soft yet brilliant light that made all else seem small in comparison. Wow, he breathed, scarcely above a whisper, not wanting to ruin the moment. They both sat quietly for a moment, drinking in the beauty of the masterful handiwork displayed for all to see. Normally, the lights from the city make it all but impossible to see them, but on nights like this, you realize just how many stars there are, Marinette said quietly, her voice carrying pleasantly over the stillness. It's beautiful. Marinette nodded in agreement. I guess it goes to show you really can find beauty in anything, even a power outage if you look hard enough. They smiled at each other, then turned their gaze back to the stars as Cat Noir said, That kind of reminds me of what your mom said earlier. It's amazing how she's able to take something as simple as roasting marshmallows and turn it into something inspiring. Marinette laughed, though her eyes shone with appreciation. Yeah, my mom is really good at that. She actually told me this analogy once before. It was a long time ago, back on my first day of school. I was really nervous about leaving home, so the night before she had us toast marshmallows together. She let me eat one plain first, straight out of the bag. It was sugary and sweet, but kind of rubbery and nearly stuffed my whole face at the time. Then she showed me how to toast one and slipped a perfectly golden brown marshmallow into my hands after it cooled down a bit. This one was warm and sweet, with a lightness that seemed to float across my tongue. After I exclaimed how good it was, my mom said the toasted one was better because it had been brave enough to face the fire. Ever since then, I've tried to remember it whenever I'm faced with something new and difficult. Often I don't like to face the heat and wish I could just get away and escape it all. But then I remind myself that a challenge can help me grow in ways I otherwise never could. Cat Noir shook his head with a fond smile. Sometimes I think you face a little too much fire, princess. She rolled her eyes and walked over to the railing with a guilty grin, but he followed her and continued earnestly. You're always doing a million things at once, more often for others than yourself, and that's something I've always admired about you, how creatively you tackle so many projects while still being ready to lend an ever-helping hand. But it's important to remember the rest of your mom's advice too. Balance the heat and give yourself time to cool off. I wouldn't want you to end up like poor Mr. Squishy, he added with a warning tone, though a teasing smile twinkled at the corners of his eyes. Marinette gave a light-hearted laugh. Okay, I promise to pace myself so I don't turn out like your poor beloved Mr. Squishy. May he rest in peace. She added with a mischievous smirk as they both glanced down at Cat Noir's stomach. He snickered quietly, leaning over the banister, Then Marinette turned to him with a thoughtful look in her eye. "What about you? Do you feel like you burn yourself out too easily?" Cat Noir paused as his face grew more serious. "Actually, what stood out to me was the part about staying soft and sweet even when you're surrounded by flames." He stared up at the sky, his mind filling with thoughts of his life at home. "I never really thought about it that way, that staying soft could be a good thing. Most people see a soft heart as a weakness, that it's better not to care about anything, staying hard and unfazable. My father's like that, firm and unmoving, yet cold." He sighed and shifted his gaze toward the ground as his voice dropped slightly. He was never really a feeling person, but his heart hardened even more once my mom was gone. I used to wish I was more like him, soldier on and let my heart turn to stone. That way nothing could ever break it. Indifferent to the world happening around me, not caring about anything or anyone. After my mom disappeared, I wanted to be that way, but I just couldn't, even when I tried. My cousin always mocked me for it. He thinks I'm weak to care about anyone other than myself. "You're not weak, Cat Noir." Marinette rested a gentle hand over his that still clung to the banister, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her just yet, the sting in his eyes too strong to open them. "You couldn't do it because despite all the difficult things you've gone through, you refused to become bitter. You kept your heart soft and didn't let your circumstances change who you are. That takes a tremendous amount of strength." She took him by the shoulder and forced him to look at her as he blinked to hold back tears. "You are one of the most caring, kind-hearted, compassionate people I know, as well as the bravest and most charming." She gave him a knowing look as a small smile slipped across his face, his eyes glancing at hers before looking back at the ground. "You love with your whole heart, and love is perhaps the strongest thing of all." She tenderly brushed her fingers over his cheek, wiping away tears. Her voice softened, and he felt his heart squeeze and loosen at the same time. "Sometimes love hurts a lot, and the pain makes you wish you never felt anything to begin with. But in the end, love is a wonderful and beautiful thing that will mend your heart from the inside out if you're willing to give it a soft place to grow." He smiled down at her, then turned back up to look at the sky, still feeling the warmth of her gentle hand on his arm. "I think you're picking up on some of your mother's wisdom, Princess." She shrugged and smiled slightly. "I just happen to have some experience with feeling too much, but I've learned it's not always a bad thing." Cat Noir nodded and turned to her with a grin, though his eyes still held a softness which echoed the gentleness of the night. "Thanks for cheering me up." Marinette tilted her head down with a shy smile. "You did the same thing for me not too long ago." His heart warmed at the memory as he thought back to the night they had comforted each other when both had their hopes crushed. He felt a blush grow on his cheeks as his thoughts turned to Ladybug, how amazing she was, and the powerful love that he felt for her. As much as it hurt when she rejected him, he knew she still cared about him, and who knows, she might fall for him someday. The way her smile brightened his spirits and her every word captivated his attention. He wouldn't trade their times together for anything in the world. And Marinette's words rang in his head as he was grateful his heart hadn't turned to stone. Marinette. His gaze turned to the small girl beside him. Her eyes turned wondrously towards the stars, and he felt a new warm light inside his chest. She was so kind and gentle, yet clever and brave, with an endless supply of compassion and creativity. He treasured the moments he spent with her, as Cat Noir and as Adrian, and he smiled to himself as he thought back over their eventful evening and the joy being with her family had brought to him. Maybe Marinette was right. Love did hurt, especially when lost or unreturned, but in the end, it might be the very thing needed to mend his broken yet softened heart, and he was beginning to feel like it already was. Thanks for reading. Hope you enjoyed. LOL, the story is way longer than I thought it would be, but I decided to roll with it. Get it? Lots of bakery scenes, rolls. Sorry, I really need to go to bed. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.